Greetings, students. Hi, this is Satyaki Chakraborty from Indraprastha Law College, Greater Noida, and today's subject is Jurisprudence-1, and the topic of the day is H.L.A. Hart's theory of natural law, and this is meant for LLB first sem and BA-LLB fifth sem students. Let us first understand H.L.A. Hart's theory, or the meaning of the concept that he had propounded in the domains of jurisprudence, which comes or falls under the purview of analytical school of jurisprudence. Since all this while in the primary classes, we were discussing about the analytical school and its propounders. We have discussed Austin's theory of analytical school of jurisprudence, and we have the other two in our syllabus, that is H.L.A. Hart and Kelson. So today, in accordance to analytical school of jurisprudence, we will be studying Hart's theory of analytical school of jurisprudence. Hart, law is a system of rules. According to Hart, law is a system of rules. According to Hart, where there is law, the human conduct non-optional or obligatory. Thus, idea of obligation is at the core of a rule. Rules of obligation are supported by great social pressure because they are felt necessary to maintain the society. So please know the students, until and unless there is an obligation attached to a rule itself, it cannot be transferred or transformed into law itself. So the idea of obligation has to be attached to any set of rules, and when this obligation tend to be attached to the rules itself, only then there is a transition which forms into a legislated law itself. And this transition of formation of law is also created and is supported by great social pressure because it is very much necessary to maintain the society itself. Hart also mentioned that rules of law fall into different logical categories that have distinct legal and social function. He distinguished primary rules from secondary rules, or duty imposing rules from power conferring rule. So there are two set of rules that are primary and secondary rules, and there are distinctions between primary and secondary rules itself. Primary rules are rules meant to guide the conduct of the individual and other legal persons, and secondary rules are rules about how primary rules are created itself. So primary rules governs the conduct of the individual. जो इंडिविजुअल की कंडक्ट होता है उनको प्राइमरी रूल गाइड करते हैं. वो इंडिविजुअल के भी कंडक्ट हो सकते हैं, एक लीगल पर्सनालिटी का भी कंडक्ट हो सकते हैं, और सेकेंडरी रूल वही रूल है जो प्राइमरी रूल को बनाता है. सो दिस इज द कनेक्शन बिटवीन द प्राइमरी रूल एंड द सेकेंडरी रूल इटसेल्फ. According to Hart, rules are concerned not with what happens but with what is to be done. So, it talks about the rules and what is to be done, and it does not talk about what ought to happen. Rules are imperative or prescriptive rather than indicative or descriptive. So, ये यहाँ पे इंडिकेशन या फिर डिस्क्रिप्शन का कोई जगह नहीं है. रूल्स आर प्रेस्क्रिप्टिव इन नेचर और इम्पेरेटिव या प्रेस्क्रिप्टिव मतलब जो प्रिस्क्राइब करता है, जो रेफर करता है कि कुछ होने वाला है और कुछ होगा, विच इज ought to happen, and it is not concerned with what happens. Please ध्यान दीजिए, according to rules are concerned not with what happens but with what is to be done. So ये जो जगह है, rules are concerned not what with happens, this is very much connected to the indicative or descriptive quality, but rules are concerned with what is to be done. So when we talk about what is to be done, it is very much connected to imperative or prescriptive rules in nature. So these rules have certain independence and self-legitimating character of itself. Kind of rules. There are two kind of rules. हम लोग ऑलरेडी डिस्कस कर चुके हैं. देयर आर टू काइंड ऑफ रूल्स. वन इज प्राइमरी रूल एंड द अदर इज सेकेंडरी रूल. सो लेट अस टेक एट द characteristics of the primary rules that are propounded by Hart itself. Primary rules regulate the behavior of man in the society. A person, लीगल पर्सन सोसाइटी में बिहेव कैसे करेगा, कैसे उनका कंडक्ट होगा, इसको जज करता है, इसको गाइड करता है प्राइमरी रूल. These rules either grant rights or impose obligations on the members of the society. जो ये जो रूल होता है ये ऑब्लिगेशन या फिर राइट को एक रूल के साथ जोड़ता है जिससे लॉ बनता है, एंड दिस इज हाउ द मेंबर्स ऑफ द सोसाइटी आर बाउंड टू फॉलो. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, रूल्स ऑफ क्रिमिनल लॉ फॉरबिडिंग murder, robbery, rash driving or primary rules, tort rules, individual right to freedom of speech. एक जैसे मान लीजिए कि एक, लेट मी गिव यू एन एग्जाम्पल स्टूडेंट्स. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, चोरी करना गुनाह है. ऑलराइट, आप सबको पता है कि चोरी करना गुनाह है, लेकिन अगर हम ये रूल बना दे, इट डज नॉट स्टॉप अ पर्सन फ्रॉम कमिटिंग द क्राइम. उनको पता है कि चोरी करना गुनाह है, लेकिन वो फिर भी ये काम करेंगे. लेकिन हम अगर एक ऑब्लिगेशन जोड़ दें इनके साथ कि चोरी करना गुनाह है और अगर आप चोरी करते हो तो आपको 5 साल 10 साल के लिए सज़ा हो सकता है, तो फिर ये ऑब्लिगेशन, ये रूल को लॉ बना देगा. एंड देयर इंस्टिल्स some kind of legal obligation which tends to be attached to it, because when you tend to say committing robbery is a crime, people do not tend to follow it because people knowingly commit robbery knowing the fact that it is a crime itself. But when the legal obligation gets attached to it, जब आपको ये लीगल एप्लीकेशन हम लोग देखते कि अटैच हो जाता है कि चोरी करना गुनाह है और अगर आप चोरी करते हो तो इसके लिए आपको सज़ा मिलेगा, तो एक लीगल ऑब्लिगेशन अटैच हो सकता है क्योंकि आपके मन में वो फियर इंस्टिल होता है, क्योंकि आपको पता है कि अगर आप पकड़े जाते हो तो आपको आपके अगेंस्ट लीगल स्टेप लिया जाएगा, आपको पनिशमेंट मिलेगा, तो इट बिकम्स अ लॉ. So these are primary rules. These are primary set of law where an obligation is very much attached to it. Secondary rule. Secondary rules are those that stipulate how and by whom the primary rule must be formed, recognized, modified or extinguished. तो secondary rule कौन है? जो स्टिपुलेट करता है या प्राइमरी रूल को फॉर्म करने में, रिकॉग्निशन मिलने में या फिर उनको बनने में, उनका फॉर्मेशन में, उनका मॉडिफिकेशन में सहायता करता है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, कॉन्ट्रैक्ट लॉज रूल्स दैट इनेबल पार्टीज टू फॉर्म कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, द रूल्स दैट अलाउ टेस्टेटॉस टू क्रिएट अ विल, द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल रूल दैट कन्फर लेजिस्लेटिव पावर. तो ये सपोर्टिव हो गए. ये जो सेकेंडरी रूल रहा है ये सपोर्टिव सिस्टम है, इसमें ऑब्लिगेशन जुड़ा नहीं है क्योंकि ये प्राइमरी रूल को सपोर्ट करता है, so that the primary rule can lay its fundamental or its established ground in the legal domain. So let us take a peek at the differential study between primary and secondary rule. Under primary rule, human beings are required to do or abstain from certain action, and in the domains of secondary rule are in sense parasitic upon or secondary to the first. So in the primary rule, human being has to abstain. Abstain matlab to stay away, not to commit something or not to commit certain action. Whereas secondary rules are parasitic upon or secondary to the first. Parasitic matlab it is completely dependent on the primary rule itself. The primary rules bind people whether they like or not, wish or not. Secondary rule bestow facilities upon them for realizing their wishes. So primary rules bind people. So it talks about binding the people. Matlab they have to follow the rule whether they like it or not. और सेकेंडरी रूल bestow facilities upon them for realizing their wishes. वो फैसिलिटी बिस्टो करते हैं, कॉन्फर करते हैं लोग के ऊपर कि वो अपना विश रियलाइज करे. Thirdly, primary rules are essential for social life, whereas secondary rules are necessary for the development of legal system. So primary rules very much governs our social life. Lekin secondary rules are very much important because it is a supportive system. It not only acts as a supportive system to the obligation that is attached to the primary rule, but it also lays a monumental ground for the development and the modification of legal system itself. So these are the difference between the primary and the secondary rule itself, and this is the concept of HLA Hart. तो HLA Hart का जो हम लोग कंसेप्ट देखे हैं उनका प्राइमरी रूल और सेकेंडरी रूल के ऊपर एनालिटिकल कॉन्सेप्ट बनता है, क्योंकि वो ये कहते हैं कि प्राइमरी रूल इज इम्पेरेटिव इन नेचर, जिसके साथ एक लीगल ऑब्लिगेशन जुड़ा होगा और ये ऑब्लिगेशन वो रूल को लॉ बनाएगा और वो प्रेस्क्रिप्टिव होगा कि जो होने वाला है वो उसके बाद वो नहीं कर रहे, और वो जिनके जो रूल की बात कर रहे हैं विच इज़ वेरी मच रैशनल इन नेचर, विच इज़ वेरी मच इम्प्लीमेंटिव इन नेचर, और जो रूल एक ना कि सोशल लाइफ को गवर्न करेगा बल्कि उनके साथ वो सेकेंडरी रूल भी जुड़ता है जो प्राइमरी रूल को सपोर्ट करता है, और प्राइमरी रूल और सेकेंडरी रूल सोशल लाइफ और लीगल सिस्टम दोनों को लेके एक फंडामेंटल जुडिशरी बॉडी बनाते हैं, और यही उनका एनालिटिकल स्कूल ऑफ जूरिस्प्रूडेंस में थ्योरी रहा है. So this is all about H.L. Hart's theory of analytical school of jurisprudence, which is all about the rules, the obligations attached to it, and the two set of rules that he talks about, that is the primary rule and the secondary rule itself. So this will be for it today class. Thank you.